Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be the first of my big 3 end of year videos that I always do on the channel to celebrate the end of a year in Avatar. So this one of course is going to be the top 5 Avatar story moments from the content that came out in 2024. The other 2, which will be released more in late December, will be first up the 2024 Avatar Year in Review, where we'll look back on everything, including the story content, but also news and merchandise that happened in 2024. And then the final video right towards the end of the year is going to be the preview video for the year ahead in Avatar, the 2025 Avatar preview. But just before we jump into this video, I do want to mention that I do have YouTube channel membership enabled on the channel, and it is the best way that you can help to support the channel. I don't often mention these in many of my videos just because a lot of the times I do just forget because I'm so focused on making the video. I don't think about kind of plugging this stuff, but every so often I remember that, oh yeah, I probably should do this because it is actually very helpful for the channel. Without a lot of channel members, the channel will not be making anywhere near as much as it is, and a lot of the growth that I get in terms of subscribers does seem to be offset by decisions that YouTube makes that affects like how much you make on ads, and so the YouTube channel membership definitely helps for that growth to actually be kind of proper growth on the channel. So 2 tiers are available, Light Spirit and the Avatar tier. You will get access to loyalty badges and custom emojis at all tiers, but if you go in at the Avatar tier, the higher tier, you will also get access to exclusive videos that I put up usually once a month, and most of the time these are kind of non-Avatar videos. Because of Netflix Avatar this year, there is a few Netflix Avatar kind of commentary videos that are up there as well, but a lot of these are kind of videos I wouldn't usually put up on the channel about different things, very much extra bonus videos, but some cool stuff there. If you do want to help support the channel, like I said, it is very, very helpful. So with that out of the way, let's get into the kind of intro to this. So before we get to my actual top 5, we need to actually cover what are we choosing from? What is the story content that actually came out this year that the moments are going to come from? So jumping in with some of the smaller stuff that came out this year, we had of course some Avatar Legends RPG material. Our main book is of course the Uncle Iroh's Adventure Guide, which of course features lore. We get new legend NPC characters, and there were 5 adventures, 1 for each era, all set on the book's kind of gimmick location, that being Jasmine Island. A interesting book, definitely. Jasmine Island is very interesting. Some of the legend NPCs are cool, and there's some nice stuff in the adventures, but ultimately it's not the most substantial or important material covered in this book. Maybe if this was the Spirit World book that we initially thought we were maybe going to get this year, something much more notable would have come out. But for now, a solid but maybe slightly uninteresting book overall. We also got 2 other Legend RPG adventures separately. For free RPG Day, we got the Rebels and Refugees adventure, and then released at roughly the same time was the new sort of how to play intro adventure, Storm over Linsho. Again, some decent stuff in both of them, but unfortunately nowhere near impactful enough to hit the list, but it is content that came out this year. Last on this slide we have here is My Cabbages. So this is a picture book, but our first picture book to actually feature new content. It features quite a bit of new information on the Cabbage Merchant, including his name, a look at his family, a sense for how exactly his kind of journey went in between his kind of key appearances in the show. A pretty nice book, but again, not the most important material in the world. Moving over to the more impactful stuff where the list will actually be formed from, we of course had Netflix Avatar release season 1 or book 1 this year, right back towards the start of the year. definitely played a big role in terms of there being a lot of Avatar hype and excitement towards the start of the year, and is deserving of being considered for this list. Obviously, it's probably the first time we've really had to consider sort of canonicity and stuff like that for this list. Obviously, the Netflix show is its own separate continuity, but it is still story content, so it will be considered for the list. Of course, I'm not going to exclude it just because of that. So yeah, big thing there. We got our first, live action show for Avatar after, obviously, years ago we had the live action movie. But in terms of our more usual content, we got a new novel this year, The Reckoning of Roku, the first of the 2 Roku novels released this year, written by the new author on board, Randy Rabai. So that came out this year as the most kind of significant piece of content for the kind of mainline kind of animation continuity. So that was quite impactful. And then the comic that released this year was, of course, The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer, the June and Iroh-focused one-shot comic. And unfortunately, that was the only release this year for Dark Horse. So a bit of an interesting selection of kind of things this year, where, of course, the big things of like live-action Season 1 plus the Roku novel are absolutely highlights, but some of the other things are maybe not either the most impactful, or some of the publishers didn't quite deliver this year, which is very unfortunate to see. But with that out of the way, we can jump into the list, which will be my top 5, but I will lead off with 2 honourable mentions. So we'll start with my first honourable mention, and this is from The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer, and specifically the Iroh side of the story here, and this is basically Iroh and Kyung's backstory during the siege of Ba Sing Se. So as part of the plot here, Iroh gets confronted with his past. That's the kind of theme of The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer. It's the idea of you have this kind of past life, can you move on and in a way sort of have a life after something kind of bad has happened, or you are viewed as being a bit of a villain in the past. And Iroh is seen as an example of someone who can and has moved on, but now all of a sudden this great tragedy moment is brought up here, the Siege of Ba Sing Se, where he lost his son and abandoned the siege. Now we see the more negative kind of like, oh, Iroh, you made a mistake here aspect of the siege here, of like, did he make sure all of his men got out in time? And how do the people under his command, who kind of like were dying for their nation and in a way for their commander, how did they feel about Iroh deciding to abandon this nearly successful siege on the verge of victory as well? And Kyung brings up a lot of that. He is the one who has ordered the kind of bounty on Iroh, because he wants Iroh brought before him to answer these questions and ultimately to kind of die in front of him. He basically wants kind of Iroh to kill himself. And Iroh refuses to do this. And it's a really, really strong moment to kind of highlight the theme of the book. And it links perfectly into the backstory as well, because it's the idea that the lesson that Iroh took from the death of his son is that a lot of pointless death happened during the war, and he would see dying for this kind of revenge kind of thing because of the war would just be another pointless death. He agrees with the idea of like making amends for kind of bad things done in the past, but he refuses to atone for his mistakes by dying for it. And it's a super strong moment for Iroh to say that, and in a way for June to be there when he says this also. Now, Kyung has a point here, because the idea is that Iroh made an effort to get basically all of his troops out, but Kyung and his elite force were already kind of like deep undercover behind enemy lines, because they were kind of an advanced kind of infiltration force. So he was unable to get word of the retreat into them, because they'd broken through the walls, but they hadn't fully, infiltrated just yet. And so the logistics of the situation meant that when he called the retreat, he was unable to get Kyung out. And Kyung does reveal to us that the other men in his squad died. He seems to be the only one who made it out. And it's an interesting one. It's about the idea of ultimately two characters, Iroh and Kyung, who have been able to mostly move on from what happened in the past, in that Iroh now owns a tea shop in Ba Sing Se, and Kyung actually now runs the tea cartel. The problem is, one of them is still obsessed with the past, while the other isn't. Kyung is still who wants revenge for what happened, whereas Iroh has been able to move on, and it's that sort of contrast that Kyung can't see, that if he could put his vengeance aside, he has a new life for himself. He has made something for himself, and June is able to kind of see that by the end of the book. And I think it's a quite interesting and kind of nuanced kind of depiction of this side of things, and kind of highlighting that, you know, everything's not perfect with when it comes to Iroh and the decisions of his past. And I quite liked what they did here. Again, there's still a lot around the Siege of Ba Sing Se that I think probably needs to be delved into. It would be cool to get like a full story of that actually includes like characterization of Lu Ten, what exactly was happening, and that sort of thing. But it's a nice insight into at least a sense for what happened during all of this. So that is worthy of being in my honorable mentions. Moving into honorable mention number 2, this is the only appearance on the list from Netflix Avatar. So this is Lu Ten's funeral scene from N104, the 4th episode, Into the Dark, which in a weird kind of coincidence, it has my favorite scene in Netflix Avatar, but is probably the worst episode overall of Netflix Avatar. So that's a bit of an interesting one. But this is a really, really well done scene, and it had to have a spot on my list somewhere. It's an original scene, which is very interesting, kind of highlighting that this is a show that was capable at times of doing some very strong material, but it also highlights, like, you otherwise had such strong material. How did you miss the mark in terms of adapting some of it kind of so badly, but nailed some of this original material? Obviously, I think we all can see at this point now that there's a little bit of a lack of sort of focus when it comes to which characters are being focused on, where very clearly the Iroh and Zuko stuff was done quite well. The stuff involving a lot of the gang members, not so much. So obviously tons of improvement needed going into season 2, but there were glimmers, moments like this scene that showed that if they correct some mistakes from season 1, they can turn some of the show's better material from season 2 and 3 into something quite strong. But let's get into talking about this scene here. So we go into flashback because, of course, Iroh encounters, an enemy soldier from, the Siege of Ba Sing Se, who knows him. And he kind of alludes to, oh, you're just a monster from the Fire Nation. But we then, of course, cut into highlighting the more emotional kind of situation with Iroh surrounding the Siege of Ba Sing Se. The fact that he did lose his son, Lu Ten, during the siege, and he went on to abandon it, of course. In this case, though, in comparison to the Iroh kind of Kyung scene, we do highlight the more emotional aspect of the impact on Iroh here, of the sadness of him at the funeral for his son, and in a way the culture of the Fire Nation not being the greatest, especially in this era when it comes to dealing with this sort of emotion, where Iroh's honor is in a weird spot where Lu Ten is remembered well because he died for his nation, but Iroh is not well regarded because he abandoned a siege, even though, Iroh's actions like saved other people's lives and stuff like that, but because it hasn't emboldened the Fire Nation, it's viewed as a kind of dishonorable act. And you can see it as like people come up to him and they say the correct current Fire Nation thing to him of, you should view it as an honor that your son died for your nation, and that should be the focus and the takeaway for you. And then Zuko comes up, and he initially says the ultimately, correct thing, that what's expected of the Prince of the Fire Nation to say, and that is that it's an honor for Lieutenant to have died for his nation, type thing. He walks past, but then realizes that, no, this is my uncle, I care about him, I should say more than sort of what I'm expected to, and then opens up a little bit, and it's like Zuko gets it. Like, this is highlighting a bit of like why Zuko is different, that the banishment and what's happened has removed this aspect of Zuko, and this is the aspect of Zuko that's there that he needs to get back, and shows the potential for the future if he was ever to find the right path once again, because he's able to say the exact right thing to Iroh. Go up and share a moment about the memory of Liu Ten. Not just that, oh, he died for his nation, but that, hey, Liu Ten was super important to you. He was super important to me as well. He gave me this medal that he earned during his officer training for being the best in his class. And him giving it to me really helped me. I looked up to him as being this incredible person, and he helped me through rough moments. I think I now need to give this to you to help you through this moment. And then, more than that, he sits down next to Iroh as everyone else basically comes through to give their sort of condolences effectively to him. And that's where we ended. We cut away. It has the kind of little Soldier Boy music kind of playing in the background. So they hit all of the right beats, and it's just an example of this show has a handful of moments that are just incredibly strong, but it is just a handful of them. I would also say at the same time, conversely, I don't think that the show has that many moments that are outright bad. It's just a lot that's very, very middle of the road. They did the bare minimum for a lot of the adaptation scenes, and the show ends up just kind of coming across to me overall as it's okay, a few good things, a few bad things, but most of it's just it's fine, ultimately. So that's why I think it's deserving of a spot here in the honorable mentions, but not quite in the overall top 5 moments that have more brand new content going on with them. We jump into the actual top 5 with my number 5 moment, and it's also from The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer, but this time on the June side of thing. It is June decides to rescue Iroh, taking her first step towards a new life. I went with this as the comic entry on the list over the Iroh scene, just because the book ultimately for me is more June focused than it is Iroh focused, in that this is the scene the book builds towards. This is the scene positioned as the big character moment over anything specifically that Iroh does, because Iroh has already made his step towards a new life. It's just that past never quite goes away and it gets brought up again, whereas June has yet to actually make the transition into a new life, and this is the moment where we see that actually happen. So she's just at this point turned Iroh in, she's got her reward for the bounty on Iroh and leaves, but is aware that Kyung wants to kill Iroh and is thinking about this the whole time. She even had a slight argument before she was kind of forced to leave with the money. So she goes to visit her, of course, old bounty hunting colleague Fawn on her farm. Fawn is also a character who has moved on to this kind of new stage in her life, away from being a quite ruthless bounty hunter to now being sort of a farmer who has actually a lot going on, has changed quite a lot. And the point that we get to here in this scene is the idea of June thinks, well, I just heard all the terrible things that Iroh did in his past. He's not a nice person because of that. And Fawn points out that, hey, think about that in relation to me. What would they say about me in the way I used to be? And June has to point out that, oh yeah, they would always say Fawn's so heartless, she'll turn in her own mother for a bounty. That's how bad it was. And then we get the line that I have here up on screen. I like to believe that it's possible for people to change, to make amends for what they've done in their past life, but you got to actually want to change. And taking that first step towards a new life, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And it hits. And I like the use of this character Fawn as a kind of older bounty hunter character to help June make this transition. That I think this would come across slightly differently if it was Iroh super directly having this conversation with her. It means a little bit more that June with Fawn plus a little bit of Iroh from earlier on in the comic is able to then make this decision where she thinks hard about it, slams her reward money down on the counter, and is just like, hey, I'm going to hire you for one last job. I want you and the gang back together as kind of bounty hunters because we're breaking Iroh out. This is the right thing to do. This is basically, I'm quitting being a bounty hunter after this. We're getting him out, and I'll see what I'm going to do after that. And I think it's a pretty strong moment of kind of character arc for June, as the book overall takes her away from being a bounty hunter into being more of a tea hunter for Iroh, finding him rare teas. And so she has this connection now to Iroh, to her old bounty hunting kind of buddies, while she still gets to adventure. And I think it's a pretty nice spot to leave June in, and we can use her again if we ever kind of need to, as she is now very much positioned on the more kind of allied side of things if we need someone with her skill set, or we need a Shearshoe for something or something like that. But yes, that is my number 5 pick. At number 4 on the list, we have our first appearance from The Reckoning of Roku, our novel for the year. So the moment I've chosen is from right towards the end of the book, Roku and Sozin's conversation at the end of the book, where we effectively get the big kind of moment we've been waiting for from the course of the book, kind of just revealing that both of them have changed. Their relationship has changed because Roku is now active as the Avatar. Sozin is going to be the Fire Lord one day. Their friendship is never going to be the same it once was in the past. And the big takeaway from this moment, we'll get into the details of their conversation in just a second, but by the end of it is Roku, I think very correctly, realizing that he has grown away from Sozin to the point where he doesn't need Sozin anymore in the same way that he used to in the past. Like he did sort of in the aftermath of the death of his brother. He badly needed someone like Sozin there. Otherwise, who knows what sort of a position Roku would be in. But now he has really, proven himself over the course of some of the big kind of finale moments in this book. He's well on his path to being the Avatar, and he realizes that he doesn't need to have the same kind of view of Sozin as he used to. And this is one of the big moments of growth for Roku over the course of this book, is sort of just realizing that, I can view Sozin as someone who can be ruthless, would do things for the sake of the Fire Nation and for his, own power. He is sort of like that. I can't be blind to that just because I'm his friend. But they still are friends by the end here, because of course it's not until years later when we really see this friendship, truly and properly fracture. But of course the book presented a lot of the seeds of, even from an earlier stage, about kind of why that is happening. But I think they did it in a very nice and nuanced way here, where we learn more about Sozin's perspective on this more towards the very end of the book, in like the final chapter, that he also views it as, yes, their dynamic has changed. But the difference is that Sozin is now even more eager to sort of, utilize his relationship with the Avatar to his advantage, despite not wanting to do that in the first place. But over the course of the entire book, basically doing that, and that's what the plot is. But this whole chapter is about pointing out that the net result of that is that effectively Roku comes out of this in a position with better leverage to utilize his relationship with, someone who's going to be the Fire Lord to get what he wants out of the situation. And just highlighting that, yes, the lacking in confidence Roku character from right towards the start of this book, no, he has changed and is now willing to use that leverage himself against his friend to get what he feels the world actually needs. And so that's part of the conversation here. It's that, yes, Sozin admits that he lied to Roku about what happens. There is an apology here, so we do get the kind of rare Sozin apology. But he also says, basically, what can I do? I'll do anything to make amends, effectively. And Roku decides that, do you know what? In the past, I probably would have brushed something like that aside with Sozin, but no, on the Avatar, I'm going to use this moment to my advantage, and so he asks for two things. That being, one, that he makes sure with his father that Lombok Island does get to remain sort of like independent. They're allowed to like rule themselves. There could be some sort of a deal if you absolutely have to, but they should maintain control over the island and themselves, which ends up happening. And then the other one is, of course, that, hey, I want you to open up an air temple in the Fire Nation capital, because I think all of the nations need to learn from the air nomads to be a little bit better in this kind of era of rising tensions between the eras. And we know it's going to be a kind of Cold War era where there's a lot of building up and plans being plotted in the background, and Roku just trying to kind of prepare for that ahead of time. So a lot about this, and this is the whole book basically builds up to this moment. The whole book is basically about Roku going from being lacking in confidence, doesn't feel he deserves to be the Avatar at all or can be the Avatar, to actually being the Avatar the world needs. And then Sozin's arc of going from all I care about is my important friendship with Roku, basically above all else, to no, wait, actually my ambitions go beyond Roku. I'll still do a lot for him, but his priorities have changed, and the kind of evil side of him very much begins to come out in the final stages of this book. And we really see the evolution into, yes, the Avatar the Fire Lord very clearly is now going to take place going forward from this point out. It's just a matter of time, the pieces fitting into position, that sort of idea. So really strong kind of moment here, as I'm guessing this will be the final time these two see each other for the next, however many years, until they basically see each other after Roku finishes his Avatar training. So very cool scene there. My number 3, I will readily admit, is a little bit of a cheat, in that it is not really one specific scene, because I couldn't really choose one individual moment that I think just represented everything I wanted to say about Malaya. So instead I just decided, hey, I just want to give the number 3 slot to Malaya here, and just her involvement in the book, full stop, as this really cool character we had no clue prior to the book releasing was going to be in the book, who turned out to be a real kind of surprise star of the show once we actually got the book and found out, we're really going to be exploring this island, Lombok Island, and we're actually going to have multiple, focus characters from the island, that we're going to get the native point of view. And most of that did come through Malaya, who ends up by the end of the book being this very tragic character, because we get the very tragic and brutal death of Malaya at the hands of Sozin, effectively preventing her from becoming what was pretty much locked in to be a future Team Avatar member, or at the very least, a potential, really strong friendship, or they were definitely teasing a little bit of romance between herself and Gyatso, and their friendship over the course of the book was really, really good. And so Gyatso comes out of this book very heartbroken about what happened to her. Even Roku, even though he only really had one major scene with Malaya, he's upset about what happened, because you got the sense that these three were going to become a really nice trio of friends kind of going forward. And Sozin has gotten in the way of a lot of that happening. But just in general, her arc I thought was very, very interesting. That there's obviously a big contrast between Malaya and then Ulo as the other kind of main native point of view character. One very much being anti-outsider, that being Ulo, and then Malaya being someone who's quite idealistic and optimistic about outsiders coming to the island. Now, of course, over the course of the book, she kind of is proven sort of right and wrong at the same time, in that her idealism, gets the island into a bit of trouble. The outsiders do cause damage, but at the same time, she meets some of the people she very quickly becomes like the closest to in her life by meeting Gyatso, who she can immediately feel a very strong connection with, a connection she's not really had with anyone. And through Roku realizes as well that like a lot of the lies about the Avatar are not the case, and that hey, other people can just be like normal, cool outsiders. That the Ulo point of just we should kill everyone who comes to the island is not a good thing to do. And that is the kind of takeaway probably from the end of this, is just that it's made quite clear at the end, eventually enough people were going to find the island regularly enough to where they were going to bring catastrophe on themselves by just keeping up this anyone who finds us is going to get killed approach. And eventually they were going to have to do something more along the lines of Malaya and what she wanted to do and reach out. Of course, we saw when she did that, she basically got betrayed. And they did a very interesting arc with her towards the kind of like end of the book, where you saw her kind of in a way kind of realize her mistake, realize like the violence that outsiders can bring, and having that, you know, fight within herself about, wait, am I just kind of like some of the rest of the tribe where I am violent and I do want to hurt outsiders, or is this normal and understandable and I can choose to not do this but still feel annoyed about the situation? And you know, her kind of realizing that this is kind of impacting how kind of Gyatso is looking at her, and that kind of changing things. But then she meets Sozin and realizes she has a choice to make here, and she really realizes that she needs to take Sozin out, but at the same time he sees what she's planning to do and realizes he has to take her out. And we get what happens in the chapter called Her Final Act, where she plans to kill him, but he has the advantage. He turns the tables on her and brutally kills her, of course. And and because they're kind of alone, and because of what happens, he is able to keep it a secret. I do wonder if at all in book 2 we are going to address, you know, if there is any suspicion about what exactly happened here, maybe on the Gyatso side of things, with his arc, because I'm assuming he will still be dealing with the death of someone he felt very, very close with towards the end. But yeah, I just thought she was a really, really well done character with some interesting kind of arcs here, just with regards to even like her skill set, the idea of like she was this scout who very much wanted to learn everything from everyone. So she knew a little bit of all of these sort of survival, foraging skills, but also she had fighting skills. She was one of the few people who didn't just get a weapon made, but worked with the blacksmith to make it herself. And you could really see that, like, yeah, something like this perspective as like a part of Team Avatar would be like very, very kind of important going forward. And there just is that real tragedy of just what could have been, what the future would have been if Malaya was able to get off the island and maybe thrive alongside Gyatso with the air nomads and potentially as a member of Team Avatar going forward as well. It really felt like if she had just made it out of this incident, how she could have thrived effectively, because she had such a kind of wonder for what the outside world is actually like. So just massive praise for Malaya, to the point where, like, probably in terms of novel characters, she's rocketed right up there to being one of the main characters I want to see a canon visual design for in the franchise. It's definitely probably her or Lao Ge, just to see what the official design is for them. But hopefully we do get to see Malaya sooner rather than later, because I think most people came out of the book really liking her character. So yeah, a little bit of a cheat. It's not quite a moment necessarily, but there was just so many nice moments for her over the course of the book. Like her fight with Amihan was quite strong. Some of her reaction moments to like her getting to see the really nice and emotional reunion of Gyatso and Roku was quite interesting. Just because you got this weird sense that, like, diving into some of the kind of mysteries in a way still surrounding her, of just like, Yeah, what's going on with her and her parents to the point where like Gyatso and Roku hugging as they kind of make up basically is one of the most kind of like intimate displays of emotion she's maybe ever seen in her life. That Gyatso hugging her a few chapters later is like the first time she's ever been hugged. That's quite interesting overall. So really, really big fan of Malaya. At number 2 on my list is another Reckoning of Roku moment. This one is Sister Disha reveals key information about the end of Avatar Kyoshi's life. This is mostly from the chapter Let Go, but I think with a little bit of context from the chapter 2 Wicks, where Kyoshi and Roku talk via past life connection. This is one of the biggest talking points coming out of the book. It's one of the things I always get asked about when I read these books, when I do videos on it, is what past life information was presented in the new novel. And in this one, of course, with it being about Roku, people were asking about Kyoshi, and specifically, do they cover the end of her life? Roku, in fact, over the course of the book is occasionally bringing this up of like, did you know Kyoshi? And so we get to the end of the book, and finally we get this kind of big reveal, not just about Kyoshi, but also about Sister Disha, mainly about the idea of, oh yeah, why was she specifically chosen to be Roku's airbending master? She's obviously a master airbender, but they never clarified specifically why she was chosen, especially given that his training is taking place in the Southern Air Temple, and that sort of stuff. So the reveal here that Sister Disha knew Kyoshi and was in fact her last airbending companion is super interesting and helps to explain a lot about why there is the Roku Disha connection, which I think is very, very cool. It immediately makes Disha so much more interesting, and you realize, oh yeah, there's so much we didn't know about her. This explains a lot. But we basically get to the idea of Disha was Kyoshi's airbending companion right up until basically the last 2 years of Kyoshi's life. They parted ways under bad terms, and from that point on, Kyoshi didn't actually have any other airbender companion because of the details surrounding what happened. Very briefly, to kind of go through this for just context for the pick, basically on their final mission together, Kyoshi ended up killing a Dao Fei leader, but the twist on this is that this Dao Fei leader was the son of a previous Dao Fei leader who Kyoshi had also killed in the past, effectively presenting the idea that Kyoshi, to a certain degree, created one of her next villains by doing what she did previously. And the overall takeaway from Disha is that as Kyoshi aged, again, given that she's like 228 when they part ways, she dies at 230. The more and more time went on, the more Sister Disha felt that Kyoshi was beginning to lose sight of the value of individual lives, and she felt she had to separate from Kyoshi at that point, and kind of asked Kyoshi to kind of consider her actions. A pretty brave move, speaking up to such a legendary avatar, such a long-lived avatar as Kyoshi. And in fact, she told this to the kind of other air nomads, the elders and so on. And the result of this is that no airbender wanted to be part of Kyoshi's team avatar after this, because the implication being that this is someone who, if you go on a mission with and you encounter an enemy, Kyoshi is more than likely going to kill that person and maybe not ask the required questions. And do you want to be associated with that as an air nomad? Typically they don't, given the way we know about stuff like Kelsong and his legacy based on what he did to protect people, all this sort of stuff. We know how they feel about this stuff. So that's super, super interesting. But then the question comes up, well, if that's the case, then how did she die? And while Disha, of course, doesn't know, she, of course, says that, like, I wasn't with her when she died, like, it was 2 years afterwards when it happened. My guess is that she basically finally looked inwards, that to a certain degree, the people around you can sometimes see you better than you can see yourself. She reflected on things and decided to let go. with the implication being that this was the point where Kyoshi, I guess, decided to stop doing the kind of immortality technique that she learned from Lao Ge to live as long as she has. And within 2 years, I guess, the effects had either reversed. We don't really know the mechanic behind stopping doing the technique does. But that's the sort of implication coming out of it, is just that eventually, when you're that old and you stop doing the technique, you're going to see the age show itself eventually. And within 2 years, Kyoshi died. So I think they very clearly present the idea. Kyoshi was not defeated by any villain. Kyoshi, her era came to an end because, to a certain degree, she realized that she had lived too long, and that had affected her and the people around her that she cared about. Pointed out to her that we disagree with your kind of thought process about how you handle some of these situations. And she finally was able to kind of reflect on this. And this is where I really like that this was a part of the Roku and Kyoshi past life scene from a few chapters before this, of Kyoshi's ultimate advice to Roku after, defending the idea of, it was okay that you killed Ulo, you did what you had to do. But her advice at the end is, make sure you basically don't forget to look inwards and reflect on things. And as in, I didn't do that until way later than I needed to, and I probably caused more chaos than I needed to, that sort of idea. But also, it is an insight into the idea of, should an avatar kill their enemies? With Kyoshi, we know what her kind of view on it was in most situations. Interestingly, Roku also has this as a topic that comes up with him when it comes to Sozin, but they also tackle it here with Ulo. And his reaction to having to kill Ulo is that he hates that is the decision that he took and that he was almost forced to take, and he hopes that he doesn't have to do that again, that there should be always another option, that you can't kill your way to peace. And that's where Kyoshi can't defend that, and that as much as she kept peace to a certain degree by killing, it created the situation that Roku now faces in terms of what the kind of political landscape is, of that being more of a Cold War type situation developing, where people are planning in the background rather than attacking out in the open. And so this is why I think this is such a well done scene. Like I said, you learn about Kyoshi as an individual, Disha as an individual, how this affects the current avatar, Roku, and it just really works as a fantastic scene in pretty much every regard. So huge praise for me for this scene, and that's why it's my number 2 moment. And last but not least, my number 1 pick is also from The Reckoning of Roku, and that is Yasu's death and funeral from the chapter called Roku Alone. So when they use that naming convention, character alone, they have to deliver an important chapter or piece of content, and they definitely did here. Both scenes, both the kind of flashback sequence of where we actually see Yasu die, Roku was with him, but then the funeral afterwards, are both really well done and help to explain so much about Roku and why he is the way he is at the start of this book, the lacking in confidence character, the character who's very eager to prove himself but doesn't almost trust himself enough to actually not fail. And we see this is where that comes from, that his takeaway from this situation is that he failed, and that because of this, he's likely to fail at being the avatar going forward, and it is something that he does still need to kind of move on from. And we'll get into it here going into the details, but I love how kind of mundane, normal the death of Yasu is, because there's no crazy avatar thing that happens here. He just gets lost at sea. He gets swept away by a wave. He doesn't come back up. He drowns as far as we're aware. And they don't present it as he's secretly missing out there somewhere. But no, he died. They looked for him. They couldn't find him. I don't think we're going to see Yasu again. But I like how it plays into the other element of this, which is just the character dynamics, that Sozin is involved in this as well. And it's Roku's kind of positioning within this dynamic of there's always the three of them together, Roku, Yasu, and Sozin, all very close friends. But when they then began to attend the academy, Roku sort of began to fall behind. Yasu and Sozin became the really close friends, and Roku began to fade into the background a little bit. And this is where this incident comes up. Yasu asks both Roku and Sozin to go out swimming. Sozin can't attend because he's been punished for destroying some stuff trying to do blue fire. So it's just the twins, the brothers, that end up going out swimming together. And you get to see the characters of both brothers here. Yasu so much more confident, willing to go and forge ahead, be out in front, and Roku kind of lagging behind, being very cautious, but in a way that caution is kind of what saves his own life and means that I guess he doesn't get swept away as well. But I don't even think that's necessarily the situation, because it does feel just very random. The weather is not great, but it's not awful, and it just seems like a rogue, not even huge wave just hits Yasu at the wrong time. Both brothers go into the water, but of course only one comes back up, and there's just a real sense of panic when it's happening. Roku desperately is looking for him and just can't accept that, whoa, a few seconds, he's probably just messing with me. It goes on, something serious has happened, I have to find him, I can't find him. And then we switch to just the kind of montage of just him being in a daze as the kind of rescue efforts from everyone else begin, and it gets confirmed that they can't find him. He has been lost, he died at sea, and so there's no body for the funeral, and that plays a role as well. There's so much like tragic stuff here of just that for Yasu's funeral they have to represent him by sort of items that represent him best, but are these the items that he would have chosen? We just have to take the best guess at that, basically. And because the two of them are twins, Roku's in quite heavy focus during the funeral, because it is very much the case of like a set of two is down to one, and he is just in a daze throughout the whole thing. But this is where so much of the really strong character stuff happens, and we see this helps to explain why he has the relationship he has with his parents, which seems to be nothing. He doesn't really care about them, and it seems like he only has a relationship with his grandmother. And the reason for that is that his father says to him, like, everyone's grieving, the entire family is grieving, Roku is as well, but his father says to him, you should have saved him. And it's just that sense of the funeral, at the funeral, the parents are helping each other through it, but they're not helping their son through it. And straight away, there is why there is no relationship. That is a terrible response, and that is devastating for Roku, who, as we see, already is not the most confident character, and now they've basically just told him that, to a certain degree, they blame him for it. It should have been you to a certain degree, and not him, and that's what he takes from it. They might not have said that exactly, but Roku feels that that is exactly the way they feel about this. And then we add on to this interesting moment where Sozin comes over, and Roku says to him, like, it should have been me, thinking that that's I guess the way everyone feels. Sozin doesn't respond to this, to deny it or say to not feel that way, but after a pause, Sozin actually steps up, and we get the really strong moment here of like, this is why the Roku-Sozin relationship is so important for both of them, but especially Roku. This is why Roku has such a hard time accepting the idea that, you know, in present day, Sozin might actually be a bit of an issue and might have lied to him and all of these things, is because during the moment when he needed someone the most, Sozin was the one who was actually there for him here to help him through the loss of his brother, because Sozin had to get through the loss of this as well. And this is the moment where he kind of says to Roku, you lost your brother, I lost a brother too. We'll always be brothers. I will never lose my remaining brother. That's Sozin's view on this. This is why he values the friendship with Roku so much, is because he was not there. He might have been able to change things himself if there were 3 people there that day, and he will never know what the answer would have been if he was there. And this is why the bond between these two is forged at this point. And it's a moment of there's no villainous kind of aspect to this from Sozin at this point. That kind of is what begins to come in much later on. Here it is just sort of Sozin being the best friend I suppose he can be at this point, and that's just super, super interesting to me, the way they did it. But also just in the context of this chapter, that Roku fails as he's walking across the island, kind of falls through the island, remembers his failure from the past, but then when he wakes up, he's finally in a way found his way in the caves underneath the island. He's heading for the sacred cave. This is where he will actually be able to prove himself as the Avatar. So they bring it sort of full circle here in a very nice way. But I do think it's for me the strongest moment from the book and kind of from the year, just because this is really the core of the Roku character arc. You could say it's maybe like this, or it's the thing I had at number 4 of just the result of the development and the conversation he has with Sozin, like I talked about. But I do think this is a very strong moment, so that's why it's my number 1 pick. And then to wrap it up with some final thoughts on the story content from the year. Another great novel for the year. It was a very efficient and successful switch in author for Abrams, being able to, without any delay, release their 1 novel a year, switching from FCE to Randy Rabai. So that was very, very positive. On the other side of things, Dark Horse, for whatever reason, just multiple years in a row, just cannot seem to do what I would consider to be the bare minimum. Is that they do Avatar and they do Korra comics. Those are 2 separate things, but they do them. They just cannot seem to release an Avatar and a Korra comic in the same calendar year, and that's happened once again. I get it, the Mako comic was meant to be this year but has been delayed, but delays just keep on happening, and especially with the Mako comic, super heavily delayed. Also, in general, just 1 new content release is simply not really good enough for Dark Horse and Avatar comics in 2024. The fact that there's nothing extra, there's no free comic book day book, there wasn't a second Avatar comic. Okay, you didn't do Avatar and Korra, but nothing else at all. Very, very odd for 2024, and how many years it's been under Avatar Studios. Not good enough. Netflix Avatar did create a lot of new Avatar hype early on in the year, but I do think it died off quite quickly. And I think part of that is down to the Netflix release schedule, and then the other part of that is down to just, I think, the reality hitting a lot of people that, oh yeah, it is just an adaptation of the animation, and that is only going to be so interesting. The hype will build up again for season 2, but I just think that is the kind of Netflix model of hype. You have the sort of month before release, you have probably a month or so, a couple of weeks for people to actually experience the content once it releases, and it doesn't really last that much after that point. And that is the problem with dropping it all at once versus it airing over the course of 2-3 months, that sort of thing, depending on how many episodes it is. 2025 already from the upcoming releases looks to be stronger and should end up being even better, as we finally actually truly will be getting close to Avatar Studios at some point next year. I don't think there's really any way at this point that we get to the end of 2025 and we don't have quite a bit of substantial information about Avatar Studios projects, and we will only be weeks or months away from seeing them for the first time. And that means that for next year, there won't be an Avatar Studios project to talk about for story moments, but at the very least, you know, we should be pretty close to kind of getting one for 2026. But it does mean the publishers will still have to deliver next year, and hopefully they have some good stuff kind of leading into the release, because I'm assuming there likely should be some bigger stuff in the months and weeks leading into the Avatar Studios animated stuff from the publishers, but we have to wait and see. So, and a pretty solid year, but not what it really needs to be, is probably the best way to put it. And then the final thing here is just a massive thank you to all of my channel members on the Light Spirit tier and the Avatar tier. Tab U, Gersharon Man, Quintinius, Zem Saratobi, Alexander Forte, Michael Kahara, Gustavo Andrade, Liaj Angatnam, Coley Frog, and then in the Avatar tier, Monty Monterosa, Brit in Toyland, Fishik, Callum, Persian Lagoon, KD Love, Austin Hirth, Therian, and Beryl Mulder. Thank you for your support, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.